The mountains of North Korea were cloaked in white when the train began its slow journey through the northern provinces. It was an old, Soviet-built armored carriage reinforced with steel plating so thick it could withstand a direct explosion. Inside, the air was heavy with cigarette smoke and the faint hum of electricity. Kim Jong-il sat in his private compartment, eyes fixed on a window where only snow and darkness passed. To the men who accompanied him, their leader looked frail, his once carefully curled hair thinning, his lips pale, his gaze distant. They spoke little. The train carried not just the ruler of a nation, but the weight of an entire mythology, a man worshipped as a god, yet haunted by his own mortality. Outside, every station was sealed hours before his arrival, soldiers lining the tracks, snipers hidden on rooftops. No civilian ever saw his train, yet its presence could be felt, a phantom rumble that passed through the mountains, leaving silence in its wake. Kim Jong-il's love for trains had become the stuff of legend. He feared flying, a superstition born from the death of his father's comrades in Soviet crashes long ago. Instead, he traveled in motionless luxury on the rails, 21 cars long, each compartment dedicated to indulgence, one for meetings, one for food, another for entertainment. Imported cognac from France, fresh lobster from Japan, and endless reels of cinema filled his journey. He once joked that he could rule the entire nation from his seat, watching his enemies disappear while sipping Bordeaux. But now, on this final journey, the films were off. The laughter had gone. The eternal leader was dying, and those around him knew that no one dared speak the truth. His personal physician, Dr. Kim, had monitored him for years, always cautious, always silent. The leader's health had declined since his stroke in 2008, leaving one side of his body weaker, his gait unsteady. Yet he refused to relinquish control. Power in Pyongyang was not passed. It was seized, molded, performed. The son, Kim Jong-un, was still a mystery to most of the elite, introduced quietly, without grand ceremony, as if the old man feared to let his own creation outshine him. The doctors believed the trip that December was meant to show vitality, to reassure those watching that Kim Jong-il was still strong, still the god who never fell ill. But the irony of the journey was cruel. It would become his last. At dawn, somewhere between Haryong and Kanghae, the temperature dropped below -30. Frost gathered on the edges of the glass as the train cut through the mountains. Kim sat, slouched, staring at the motionless screen of a television. His breath had grown shallow. The guards outside his cabin stood rigid, eyes ahead, pretending not to hear the soft sounds of distress from within. The physician rushed in, the guards hesitating at the door, fearful to witness the mortality of the man they called the dear leader. Moments later, the silence deepened. Kim Jong-il's heart had stopped beating. No alarms, no wails, only the rhythmic sound of the train wheels turning over the tracks, carrying a dead god toward Pyongyang. The officials were paralyzed. In the world outside, time had frozen, yet inside that steel carriage, chaos brewed behind locked doors. No one dared declare him dead without authorization. In North Korea, even death was a matter of politics. A single misstep could mean execution. For hours they kept his body upright, arranging his coat, straightening his glasses, pretending that he was only asleep. The train continued, station by station, its guards transmitting coded messages to the capital. In Pyongyang, Kim Jong-un was waiting, already informed by the inner circle that his father had fallen into eternal rest. The Committee for Propaganda began preparing the narrative. The official statement would claim that the dear leader had died of great mental and physical strain while selflessly guiding the nation. No mention of illness, no sign of weakness, only devotion. The journey to Pyongyang became a procession of silence. Outside, villagers were ordered indoors, rail crossings sealed. The nation's radio played only melancholic music, slow, orchestral, almost funeral-like, without announcing why. Within the train, the body of Kim Jong-il lay covered in a velvet blanket, his face pale under the dim light. Around him, men who had spent decades serving his power now rehearsed their grief. Tears came on command. Every gesture, every sigh, every bowed head would soon be repeated on camera for the entire nation to see. North Korea was entering the most delicate moment of its existence, the death of a god who could not be seen to die. When the train finally reached Pyongyang, night had already fallen. Snowflakes danced under the dim streetlights as the convoy rolled into a secret platform beneath the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun. Guards with expressionless faces waited as the body was transferred into the underground tunnels that led to the leader's private residence. The inner circle gathered there, military officials, loyal aides, and Kim Jong-un himself, standing still before the body of the man who had built an empire of silence. For years, he had watched his father rule through fear, loyalty, and spectacle. Now the weight of that empire rested on his shoulders. The transition had to be flawless. The illusion of eternal leadership could not break, not even for a second. Outside the palace, the announcement came at noon the following day. State television appeared suddenly on screens across the nation. A trembling newscaster, dressed in black, read the words written by the propaganda bureau. Our great leader, Comrade Kim Jong-il, passed away from great mental and physical strain while on his way to give field guidance. The broadcast cut to images of Pyongyang citizens collapsing in tears, crowds howling in synchronized grief, children sobbing on command. It was a performance the regime had rehearsed for decades, an echo of the mourning that followed Kim Il-sung's death in 1994. But behind the spectacle, the machinery of succession was already moving, its gears hidden behind layers of deception. The people believed, or at least pretended to believe, that their leader had ascended to eternity. The trains stopped, factories froze, even wedding ceremonies were cancelled. Every household was required to mourn. Those who failed to weep hard enough were reported by their neighbors. Soldiers marched through the streets to maintain order, their boots crunching through the frozen snow as loudspeakers played solemn anthems that promised eternal devotion to the Kim bloodline. Inside the palace, embalming began. The Russians were secretly flown in, the same specialists who had preserved Lenin's body, ensuring the dear leader would remain visible, unrotting, forever watching over his people. In those days, Pyongyang became a theater of grief. Women fainted before statues, men wailed until they lost their voices, all under the watchful eyes of the state's cameras. But beneath the surface, fear pulsed through the ranks of the elite. With Kim Jong-il gone, alliances were shifting. Some whispered of purges to come, of generals who might resist the new heir. Others simply vanished, their names erased from newspapers overnight. The old train, still stationed outside the capital, stood as a ghostly relic of the final journey. To this day, no outsider has seen the full footage of that trip. No photograph of his final moments has ever surfaced. What remains is legend, crafted by propaganda, sealed by fear, and whispered by defectors who claim the truth was far more human than divine. In the end, the The train that had carried Kim Jong-il through decades of control became the vehicle of his final illusion. It returned to its depot, its wheels silent, its carriages locked. In the months that followed, it would be cleaned, restored, and placed in a museum as a symbol of his immortal journey. Tourists, carefully escorted by guides, would gaze upon it with awe, unaware that inside those walls once lay the greatest secret of Pyongyang, the death of a man who believed himself eternal. The eternal leader's final train ride was not merely a journey between two cities, it was the slow procession of a regime carrying its myth from one generation to the next, burying truth beneath ceremony and lies. The snow fell thicker that winter, covering the tracks, erasing the evidence, until all that remained was the silence of steel and the ghost of a ruler whose last breath still haunts the rails of the north. The morning after the announcement, Pyongyang felt like a city frozen in a photograph. Every building, every street, every citizen seemed trapped in a state of ritualized grief. Loudspeakers filled the air with a low, mournful hum, repeating the same orchestral lament over and over. From the balconies of government apartments, black ribbons hung like shadows. School children in red scarves stood in rows, bowing toward the portraits of Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, their faces pale from the cold. Mothers held their children tightly, whispering the official phrases of mourning. Outside, soldiers with frost-covered rifles patrolled in silence, their breath visible in the freezing air. For the people, grief was not a choice, it was a duty. Cameras captured every tear, every trembling sob, for the evening broadcast that would prove to the world that North Korea loved its leader beyond death. Yet behind those rehearsed emotions, something else lingered. Fear. In the capital, the funeral committee convened at dawn. Kim Jong-un sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, flanked by generals twice his age. The old guard watched him closely, searching for signs of weakness or hesitation. They had served his father for decades, some since before he was born, and now they were expected to swear allegiance to a young man whose face had barely appeared in public. The succession had been planned in secret for years, but death has a way of stirring ambition. Every man in that room understood that one wrong word, one misplaced glance, could determine his fate. Yet Kim Jong-un, though still a shadow of his father, spoke with calm authority. "The nation must not break," he said quietly. "The people will see continuity, not change." It was both an order and a warning. In the days that followed, the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun became the stage of the grandest spectacle of loyalty ever seen in North Korea. Kim Jong-il's body lay in a crystal coffin, illuminated by red and gold lights. His uniform was immaculate, his medals polished to blinding shine, his face preserved in an unnatural stillness. Around him, soldiers, scientists, farmers, and schoolchildren came in endless lines to bow 3 times before the glass. Cameras swept across the scene, capturing the tears, the trembling lips, the clenched fists. The images would be broadcast again and again until they became part of the nation's collective memory, proof of eternal devotion. But to those who truly looked, the scene had an uncanny quality, like a dream performed for ghosts. Life outside the capital changed shape. Villages in the countryside were ordered to gather daily for mourning sessions. Portraits of the leader were draped with black cloth, and citizens were instructed to write letters of sorrow to the party. Trains stopped, factories stood silent, markets were shuttered. Even laughter became forbidden. Those who failed to cry convincingly risked punishment. In the northern towns, reports later whispered of arrests of families sent to camps because their tears seemed too few. The state's control had always been absolute, but now it tightened into something colder, more personal. Grief was not merely emotion, it was proof of loyalty. As the funeral approached, Kim Jong-un's image began to appear everywhere. On posters, he stood beside his father's portrait, his gaze firm, his expression eerily similar. The propaganda machine declared him the great successor, chosen by destiny to carry the torch of the revolution. His father's death became his coronation. Yet within the palace walls, tension simmered. The old generals whispered behind closed doors. Some doubted his strength, others feared his youth. A single miscalculation could tear apart the balance of power that had kept the regime alive for generations. The ghosts of past purges hovered like smoke in the hallways, and in the streets the people mourned louder, as if trying to drown the sound of that uncertainty. On December 28, 2011, the funeral procession began. The sky was grey, the air brittle with frost. Thousands of soldiers lined the route as the black hearse carrying Kim Jong-il's coffin rolled through Pyongyang. Behind it, his son walked in solemn silence, surrounded by the most powerful men of the regime. Snow fell heavily, coating their coats and hats in white, as if nature itself had chosen mourning attire. The sound of weeping filled the streets, rising like a wave that followed the procession. Tanks rumbled in the distance, a reminder that this was not just a funeral, it was a display of power. The message was clear: the dynasty endured, the bloodline unbroken. Foreign journalists, permitted a brief glimpse, described the spectacle as both mesmerizing and terrifying. There was beauty in the precision, in the choreography of grief, but beneath it lay something far more chilling: the erasure of individuality. Every citizen moved as part of a single organism, every tear synchronized to the rhythm of the regime. To outsiders, it was theater. To those inside, it was survival. A mother weeping in the crowd might be crying for her son in the army, or for the food she could no longer find, or simply because not crying could mean death. The line between genuine sorrow and forced emotion had long since disappeared. After the funeral, Kim Jong-il's body was placed beside his father's inside the Kumsusan Palace, transforming it into a mausoleum of eternal leadership. The palace, once a residence, became a temple. Visitors walked barefoot along polished marble floors, surrounded by the sound of solemn music. Guides whispered scripted phrases about loyalty, sacrifice, and love for the leader. To the outside world, it was a monument. To the people, it was a reminder. The rulers never die, they only change faces. The state's myth had survived once more. Kim Jong-un wasted no time consolidating power. Within months, those who had doubted him began to disappear. Some were reassigned to distant provinces, others were executed without explanation. Even his uncle, Jang Song-thaek, who had been instrumental in his early rule, would later be publicly purged. The message echoed through every ministry and military office. The son had inherited not only his father's title, but his ruthlessness. The transition that began on that freezing train had reached its conclusion. The machinery of control continued to turn, fueled by fear and worship. For the people, life slowly returned to its grim rhythm. The markets reopened, the schools resumed their lessons, the propaganda shifted from mourning to celebration. Posters declared that the eternal leader was watching from the heavens, guiding the nation through his son. Television programs replayed his speeches, his laughter, his image smiling benevolently over the masses. His death had been rewritten into triumph. Yet, in the quiet corners of Pyongyang, where the power lines flickered and the cold crept in through the walls, whispers persisted. Some said he had died long before the announcement that the train story was a fabrication. Others believed he had been poisoned or that his death had been staged to secure the new succession. No one dared to ask aloud. In North Korea, silence was safety. Years later, visitors to Pyongyang can still see the train that carried Kim Jong-il on his final journey. It rests inside a guarded museum, gleaming under artificial light, untouched by time. On its polished floor, a single pair of leather shoes is displayed beside a desk and a cup of tea, forever waiting for the leader's return. Guides tell visitors how he worked tirelessly for the nation, even in his last hours. They never mention the doctor's panic, the frozen fear of the guards, or the truth that died with him on that cold December morning. The myth remains intact because myths are harder to kill than men. In the end, the mourning of Kim Jong-il was more than a ritual. It was the reaffirmation of control. The people cried not just for a leader, but for the unbreakable chains of belief that bound them. The snow that fell during his funeral melted into the streets, washing away the footprints of those who marched in his honor, leaving behind only the reflection of a city still trapped in reverence. Pyongyang returned to its silence, its lights dimmed by design, its people moving in rhythm with the state's endless performance. The eternal leader was gone, yet everywhere. His shadow stretched across every wall, every broadcast, every dream. And as the regime turned another page of history, the world outside could only watch, wondering what truth still lies sealed within the frozen heart of North Korea. Until next time, stay safe and see you in the next history.